Starting the, oh, I didn't mean to start that.
Yes, it sure is. Bizarre.
Hey, well, welcome everybody. Good morning, and thank you for joining us today for this presentation from Geothermal Rising, the Hot Springs Association, and the Colorado Department of Natural Resources. So I'm going to review the agenda briefly. First of all, I just want to say we're really glad that you could all join us for this timely and important conversation about geothermal development in Colorado. Your interest and engagement are what makes these discussions meaningful and impactful. And we want to extend sincere thanks to our guest speakers, Mike Rigby from the Energy and Carbon Management Commission and Kevin Donegan from the Division of Water Resources. We're incredibly grateful to both of you for your time, insights, and the work that you've been doing on this for over a year, and it's finally coming to fruition today. We support the responsible energy and water management in Colorado, and we appreciate your willingness to join us and share your expertise, and that's what makes these conversations possible. So, looking forward to that topic, we're going to do I'm sorry, I'm moving the wrong slides. Here's today's intro. And now a brief intro to Geothermal Rising. We're the oldest and largest geothermal membership organization in the world, founded in 1972. We're a 501c3 nonprofit, and we're dedicated to promoting geothermal energy and supporting those who develop and use it. And that includes the entire spectrum of geothermal uses, from high temperature, deep geothermal to low temperature, shallow, direct uses. We work to build and empower the geothermal community. We do this through education, networking, and advocacy, such as this webinar today. We engage the public to raise awareness and highlight geothermal energy's role in the clean energy future, and actively educate and engage in policy at the state, federal, and tribal levels across North America. Geothermal Rising has a focus on policy with the Geothermal Rising Policy Council. Some of our priorities are educational programs, policy advocacy, and stakeholder collaboration. And this event is a wonderful example of that kind of collaboration. And now I'll hand it over to Jessica Meath, the Executive Director from the Hot Springs Association.
Hi, everybody. I just want to reiterate my gratitude for everybody being here today, and just the partnerships and collaborations and, bringing this information and the work that they have done to get us to this point. The Hot Springs Association is a member-based nonprofit organization that supports the direct use of hot springs by advancing sustainability, quality, and recognition of natural mineral waters, and supporting owners and operators in this industry. Our work very much sits kind of at the intersection of geothermal operations, wellness, tourism, environmental stewardship, and recreation. We accomplish this through conducting research and developing best practices to protect and preserve geothermal water resources. We also offer educational programs and events with a goal to kind of ensure safe, meaningful, and high quality experiences and operations. We work to create opportunities for global collaboration and peer learning. We also work to raise awareness of the value of geothermal waters through marketing and advocacy. We welcome all types of members that support and have interest in advancing this industry. We also think that if your work touches these geothermal systems, sustainability, or wellness, we see you as a part of this ecosystem. So we absolutely invite you to learn more about our organization and join our community.
I'll give a brief overview of the history of collaboration between GR and the Hot Springs Association. Starting last year in 2024, our executive director, Dr. Bryant Jones, attended and presented at the Hot Springs Connection annual meeting in Palm Springs. Following on that, Geothermal Rising and Hot Springs Association collaborated on a geothermal symposium in Salt Lake City in December of last year. And Jessica moderated a panel on low temp and direct uses. Following on that earlier this year, I attended the Hot Springs Connection in Glenwood Springs, Colorado, and moderated a panel on geothermal technologies and how they can support hot springs operations. And soon to come this year, Geothermal Rising Conference is at the end of October, and Jessica will be attending and introducing the conference attendees to local hot springs facilities. I want to do a brief just touch base or share some upcoming events that may be of interest to participants on this call. August 9th, the Colorado Rig is having a Front Range field trip. On October 1st, the Colorado Energy Office will start their geothermal energy tax credit offering, GetCo. In addition to that, there'll be a geothermal workforce survey being sent out by the Colorado CEO. And coming up at the end of October, as I just mentioned, Geothermal Rising is hosting two events. It starts off with the Indigenous Geothermal Symposium, which is followed by the Geothermal Rising Conference. Both events are separate, but also very impactful and cover important topics. And finally, at the end of the year at the Colorado School of Mines, there'll be a geothermal symposium on December 2nd. I'll be sharing information about these events afterwards, after the call, when I send out summaries. All right, before I hand it over, I want to just do a quick reminder of some webinar etiquette. We're excited to host this conversation today, and we're especially thankful to Mike Rigby of ECMC and Kevin Donegan. We want to respect their time, and I want to remind everyone to please type your questions into the chat. We'll have plenty of time for Q&A after the presentation, and we don't want to interrupt the speakers while they're presenting. And of course, please be respectful, use inclusive language throughout. We really appreciate your time and interest in this topic, and we're looking forward to productive and respectful conversations. And with that, we're going to go ahead and get started. So I am happy to introduce Mike Rigby, who is the Energy Transition Senior Scientist at the Colorado Energy and Carbon Management Commission. Take it away, Mike.
Thanks, Amelia, and I will share my screen. Are you all seeing the screen now?
Yes, sir.
Yes, I see. All right, great. Thanks for having me here today. I'm Michael Rigby. I work with the Energy and Carbon Management Commission. I'm the Energy Transition Senior Scientist. A little bit about me: I have a background in geology, and I've been working since about 2021 on kind of non-oil and gas items at what was formerly the COGCC, now the ECMC. work on carbon sequestration, geothermal, hydrogen, and kind of other items that fall outside of the standard oil and gas operations and regulations that we've historically done. So today I'll be talking about geothermal regulation in Colorado, and specifically the 1165 that passed this year. So I'm going to give a bit of a background on geothermal uses and deep technologies, mainly just to kind of set the stage, because a lot of the strategies implemented in these bills are based on leveraging associated expertise of our divisions. I'll talk through a brief geothermal regulatory timeline, talk through specific Colorado strategies, then a little more detail on specific impacts of the bill on deep operations, give a small summary of tributary versus non-tributary, as those types of waters or groundwater really play a factor in how they are regulated and permitted. And then I'll wrap up with a small conversation on our deep geothermal resource units and consultations within our regulations. And at that point, I'll hand it over to Kevin to kind of dig into the shallow side of things and all the work they're doing over at the DWR. So I think many of you are familiar with this, but like I said, I wanted to give a little background, and I will move quite fast through these slides. But geothermal has really, the big point here is a lot of different uses across a lot of different temperatures. It ranges from things like heat pumps that don't really need a geothermal resource, that can be installed on your homes, to directly using the heat in a variety of scenarios, to then actually at higher temperatures producing electricity through turbines. So just quickly, geo-exchange systems or heat pumps, it really uses the earth as a thermal reservoir to exchange heat. They can be piped to a single structure, or they can be tied together into a network. Moving on to direct use, this is actually directly using the thermal energy or the heat from the produced fluid. This is an example of this is a hot spring. We're bathing in them, and we all love doing that. There's other types of direct use. You can use it in this picture. This is installing a geothermal system in a parking lot to melt snow. You can heat greenhouses. There's aquaculture, there's industrial uses. Some of these things are actively operating in Colorado, others are not, but there is a lot of potential for the direct use of thermal energy really throughout the state. And then we come to kind of electricity generation, where you have the heat is actually converted into electricity through a turbine in very kind of higher heat areas, maybe near plate boundaries. Not necessarily in Colorado. They'll use dry steam and flash steam turbines, where you're actually using the steam of the groundwater itself to run a turbine. Here in Colorado, with the heat resources that we have, the most applicable type of power plant or turbine is a binary cycle turbine. That said, as you drill deeper, it gets hotter. So as deeper technologies become economic, potentially these other turbines would be an option. But as of today, binary is really the main viable turbine type. And what that is you bring hot fluid up, and in a closed loop, you exchange heat with a secondary fluid that boils at a lower temperature and runs the turbine. So kind of jumping into some deep technologies, and we're kind of seeing some of these strategies either being looked at to be permitted, or science projects, or there's different pilot projects or studies being done kind of across a lot of different technologies. So I thought it was worth just mentioning some of these. There's conventional geothermal systems, and this is kind of just the normal hydrothermal systems that don't require enhancing reservoirs of any kind. And they have the three main ingredients in an abundance. They've got heat, the necessary heat, they have the necessary fluid and water, and the permeability to flow the fluid through the reservoir. and you really can just tap into these resources and typically would extract fluid and then return it to the reservoir. In cases where you don't have all those ingredients, there's things called enhanced geothermal systems. And this is a very up and coming technology. There are pilot projects going on, definitely outside the state. There's a large project in Utah that Fervo is running. And Colorado has a lot of promise for this type of technology. And it's really where there is high subsurface temperature, but there's either low water volume or low rock permeability. And there's a variety of strategies where effectively you can engineer the resource and the subsurface to make heat energy and produce electricity in many cases. Then there's another kind of flavor that is some call advanced geothermal systems. It's also just could be called fully closed loop systems, where these systems aren't intending to flow fluid through the reservoir. They're just keeping a fluid within a wellbore, entirely closed loop, down into the subsurface. There's a lot of different strategies being considered here and developed. There's some that are single wellbores. There's some that are numerous wellbores that kind of come out in like a radiator style to get kind of more surface area with the formation and the heat. I'd say a lot of these are being investigated and developed, and there's some studies going on, and I think there is some future potential, but there's maybe a little more work in this area than other areas. But that said, there are projects looking at this type of technology in Colorado and around the nation and around the world. And then lastly, I wanted to kind of touch on well repurposing. In Colorado, we have several thousand oil and gas wells that have been, development has been going on for a century. And this is what the ECMC has historically done. We regulate the development of oil and gas wells, and we've done so for many, many decades. And there are a lot of emerging considerations and technologies to kind of leverage this existing infrastructure. And there's different ways to leverage it. So there's co-production, where there's existing oil and gas that is coming from a deep enough horizon that is hot enough where you would actually just strip the heat from an active oil and gas operation, and that heat could be used to reduce on-site emissions or in close proximity to the production well. There's also the idea of, at the end of the life of oil and gas well, converting it for geothermal use, either direct use nearby or local energy needs. And I'd say there's even a third where you could use the surface impact area of an oil and gas operation and drill new geothermal wells, maybe to a different horizon, but again, maybe to co-locate these operations and leverage some synergies to reduce emissions. So a lot of interesting projects are considering pathways there in this kind of realm in Colorado. So really wanted to lay out, there's a lot of different things going on technology-wise, from heat pumps all the way to energy generation to infrastructure repurposing to direct use applications. So with that, I want to dive into a brief regulatory timeline of Colorado. Prior to 2023, geothermal operations were treated similar to water wells or other water rights and regulated fully by water courts and DWR. And as I kind of mentioned, there's a lot of different technologies that have been developing with increased interest in deep energy generation. With that, in 2023, SB 23-285 granted ECMC authority over deep geothermal operations in Colorado, leveraging our expertise in deep, complicated wellbore systems, and then retain DWR's authority over shallow operations and any use of water, retaining their expertise over these shallow wellbores as well as the water use in Colorado. It also initiated two different geothermal studies, one technical study to assess the resources around the state, and one regulatory study to build on the efforts of that law. So following that law in late 23 and into 24, we did extensive stakeholdering to develop our deep geothermal regulations. In July of last year, we released that technical geothermal resource study. It was a collaboration with the Colorado Geologic Survey, as well as Tavera. There's a lot of good information in that about the resources of Colorado, and it really used all the existing wellbore temperature data from all around the state, and it made all that data publicly available. If you haven't taken a look at it, it's on our website, and it's a good read and very informational. The next month, we had our deep geothermal regulation rulemaking, and the rules were adopted by our commission. And then a few months later in December, we released the geothermal regulatory study, building upon all of this work to identify additional items to be considered for legislation. And some of those items ended up within House Bill 251165 that we're kind of diving in more today on. Really this year, ECMC has been very focused on regulatory program development. We're developing all our forms and database, getting our maps updated, getting guidance documents built, and really preparing for operations to be permitted and regulated over here. So lots going on in that regard. I'm not going to talk too much about it though. DWR has been implementing permitting and notification requirements pursuant to the law. And then they will also begin stakeholding to amend their licensing and geothermal administrative rules. And Kevin will be really diving in on that once I hand off this presentation. So I just wanted to kind of emphasize these items, technologies, and impacted resources, because these are really a big consideration in informing the law and the division of our regulatory authority and responsibilities across the ECMC and DWR. As I noted, these technologies are very variable and they can be very shallow. They can be just to homes, or they can be power plants. But the impacted resources are also variable. And geothermal is pretty unique here. It's different from other operations like mineral development, where the substance is a tangible substance. Oil and gas is tangible. You know, it is an actual substance, so is water for that matter. But heat is a characteristic of the fluid. So it's different, but its extraction can impact operations, several operations and property. In Colorado, geothermal resources associated with tributary groundwater are a public resource, and that's distributed and dealt with through the DWR. And also in our state, geothermal resources associated with deeper confined waters, which are non-tributary groundwater, or hot dry rock where there is no groundwater, are a property right of the surface owner. So there's private property rights kind of involved in this situation as well. And to add another layer, federally, geothermal resources are considered a mineral. And then even another layer is the water use, as many of you have interests in. And many of these operations use groundwater. Some of them just move groundwater, and then many actually don't use groundwater at all. So it's with all this in mind, you have highly variable technologies, highly variable resources that are impacted. That was really the driver for leveraging our state's, the Division of Water Resources and the ECMC together to really fully regulate all these types of operations. So that brings us here to our regulatory strategies that are kind of used within or let's say defined within 1165 as well as 23285. So we're leveraging state agency expertise. The DWR regulates water rights, water uses, and shallow geothermal operations that are very similar to all of the water wells they've been permitting for many, many decades. We regulate the deep geothermal operations and the use of private resources, which is similar to what we do for oil and gas. We've been regulating deep, complex well bores for many, many decades, as well as in oil and gas, we regulate and have units to bring together mineral owners for larger scale oil and gas operations. We also have similar geothermal resource units that can bring together resource owners for larger scale deep development. And I'll talk more about that later. We're also leveraging existing water use and rights structure that was already in statute and working through the DWR with tributary and non-tributary groundwater kind of division. So the big takeaway is where technologies and expertise are really the driver for our regulatory structure. So let's talk about some of the particulars of 1165 and some impacts on deep geothermal. The energy water approach is one of the main items that impact deep geothermal operations. And what this approach does, it basically any deep geothermal operation permitted by the ECMC that is using non-tributary water exclusively to extract heat will not require a water use permit from the DWR. And I just want to highlight non-tributary only there. Additionally, there's a simple depth metric that was kind of clarified for any operations permit and really linking the operations permit to 2,500 feet. So above 2,500 feet, DWR does the operations permit. Below 2,500 feet, ECMC does the operations permit. And I'll talk a bit more about this kind of operations and use permits because there's kind of two pieces to a permit here. Then another item that's really just related to internal ECMC processes, there is a duplicative permitting requirement that was removed in this law as well for co-production activities where oil and gas operations would co-produce heat. So effectively, prior to this law, they would an oil and gas operator that wanted to also produce and use the heat from their oil and gas operations would have had to get a geothermal permit separately. They are now allowed to kind of amend their oil and gas permit with these geothermal uses as long as they're continuing an ongoing oil and gas operation. There's also some notifications added in, and I won't really talk too much about that because Kevin's going to go into detail on the notification requirements. So I wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about tributary versus non-tributary because it plays a significant role in how the project is permitted. So generally speaking, and this is very simplistic for what it's worth, but I think it's a good representation, at least at a high level. Tributary waters are any water connected to surface streams. So any groundwater that if you pump, there would be an impact to surface streams. Non-tributary waters are confined groundwater that when pumped would not impact surface streams. So effectively, a very simplistic summary, it's unconfined versus confined groundwater. But there is complexities in that. And one of the main complexities, and because we're an arid state, all groundwater is really assumed tributary unless proven otherwise. And all tributary waters retain all the protections, historic protections through the prior appropriation system, water courts and DWR, and all groundwater is assumed that unless proven otherwise, and I'll talk a little bit more about that a couple slides down. So the kind of end result of this law and SB 23285, and this is an overly maybe simplistic diagram for the right side, as Kevin will show. These blue boxes kind of break down into numerous scenarios. Our side doesn't get much more complicated though, but effectively starting up here at this red box, there's the operations permit, which is 2,500 feet. Shallower, you go to DWR. Deeper, you go to ECMC. And then there's the use of the resource, which is really based upon the type of water or the type of use. If it is tributary water, it will go to DWR and there will be water use requirements through all of their processes. If it is determined non-tributary and you're only using the water for the extraction of the heat, the project can be fully permitted at the ECMC, and that's the result of that energy water approach. And then further, if there is no groundwater deep in the subsurface, that does happen, especially in basement rock, that'd be hot, dry rock, and that type of project could also be fully permitted at the ECMC. So honing in a little bit on the scenario of no water use permit required. Obviously, non-tributary tributary determination plays an important role. And the statute really outlines 4 different ways a formation or resource could be determined non-tributary, and really just 3, because one is just adopting a previous effort. And so it can be through a water court decree, a state engineer determination, and then there's an option for a future non-tributary geothermal rulemaking that would happen at the DWR that could define, let's say, broader areas as non-tributary based on subsurface data and information. And then just circling back there, all of the oil and gas formations in Colorado in a produced water rulemaking previously were defined non-tributary. So effectively all the oil and gas formations throughout Colorado are non-tributary for geothermal use already. So that kind of wraps up some of the higher structural level items that the laws have really done and addressed over the last few years. I just want to kind of close the loop by talking very briefly about our regulations. We have a single rule series that kind of is a blueprint to the operations. They span the entire life cycle of the project from kind of permitting to project abandonment. And something I want to really cue in on here is the geothermal resource unit. This is where those private property rights come into play. It's a similar concept to oil and gas units, but it's only applicable to where those private property rights are in play, which is deep geothermal operations that use non-tributary or hot dry rock resources. And these units are created alongside the permit or after permit approval. And what they are is they comprise a formation or formations across a permit area, and they represent the resources that are utilized in the project. And what our unit process does is it designates these resources to that permitted project, and it ensures equitable compensation to all impacted owners. So just to kind of circle around, in the scenario where there is no water use permit necessary, geothermal resource unit would be necessary to define the impact to the resource and could be done alongside our permit application. And these geothermal resource units can be registered once they're active and permitted as a prior geothermal operation with DWR that Kevin will go into more detail on. And then finally, I just wanted to wrap up on consultation. We have fairly elaborate consultation requirements in our rules. There's a pre-application meeting really to bring together any potentially impacted governments or state agencies to really work with the applicant prior to even submitting an application to us. And then there's just consultation to really inform the permit. And in the consultation with DWR, and this will happen on all deep geothermal operations. And really, this is to point out that even if there isn't a water use permit required for a particular project, we will be working closely with DWR on items like tributary, non-tributary status, existing geothermal operations, any associated notifications, aquifers, existing water wells, and existing water rights in the area. So that really kind of describes at a high level kind of all these structural kind of processes, as well as what some of the things we have in place. And I know I didn't go into so much detail, but there will be time for questions and I'm happy to answer them. And with that, I am going to stop sharing and hand it off to Kevin to take the reins on the presentation. And I appreciate the time today.
Got to unmute myself. All right, everyone see my presentation?
Yes, sir.
All right, thank you. So yeah, thanks Mike and Geothermal Rising and the Hot Springs Association. Kevin Donegan, I'm chief of the hydrogeology section over here at DWR. And I just want to talk today about how this legislation and new law interact with DWR and some of our processes. So first up, let me see if I can hide this. There we go. So DWR, also known as the Office of the State Engineer, we administer water rights across the state. We issue water well use permits, represent Colorado and interstate water compact proceedings, which is a pretty big part of our work right now with all the different compacts. But we also monitor stream flow, groundwater levels, and water use across the state. We approve construction and repair of dams and perform dam safety inspections through our dam safety program. And then through our Board of Examiners, we issue licenses for water well drillers and now closed loop geothermal installers and assure the safe and proper construction of water wells and ground heat exchangers. And finally, we maintain databases of Colorado water information available on our website. So what is this new law? How is that impacting DWR's work? So the legislation added some protections or reaffirmed some protections for existing wells, water rights, and geothermal operations. And as Mike was saying, gave or affirmed DWR's exclusive authority to regulate shallow geothermal operations. And that includes geothermal well permitting, licensing for closed loop geothermal, and other water administration topics. And as we alluded to, there's going to be a couple of required rulemakings as a result of this authority. And also, I will be demonstrating new geothermal registration and notification tools at the end, if my screen will allow me. Protections for existing wells. So this bill added protections for existing geothermal operations that we've defined as prior geothermal operations. So that's a keyword. There's a new notification requirements for wells capable of impacting a prior geothermal operation. And there's also, excuse me, an opportunity to further detail these processes in the shallow geothermal rulemaking, and I'll show you how to participate in that in a little bit too. So, what is a prior geothermal operation? The definition in statute is that it is a geothermal well, operation, district, or unit authorized by DWR or ECMC, or a PGO is also a historic hot spring, which has its own statutory definition. And that is either a commercial geothermal hot spring with a vested water right, or a non-commercial geothermal hot spring that is accessible to and enjoyed by the public. So think conundrum hot springs or any other hot springs located on public land. An important thing that the legislation includes was that in order for a prior geothermal operation to receive electronic notifications from DWR, the state engineer, the owners or operators of those must register those prior geothermal operations. And that is a tool I will demonstrate at the end here of how to register those. This was another big topic of the bill. State engineer is only going to issue a new water well or a new geothermal permit if we find that there's unappropriated water available for that well, or that the vested water rights or prior geothermal operations will not be materially injured. And how do we conceptualize material injury as it relates to prior geothermal operations? So we added a definition to statute as well here, and there's footnotes here if you want to look up the statutes. But material injury to prior geothermal operations includes injury to any aspect of the vested water rights of a prior geothermal operation, including, but not limited to, water quantity, pressure, rate of flow, mineral content, or temperature. And regardless whether or not those parameters are decreed, material injury also includes diminution or alteration of any such parameter that results in an adverse effect to a prior geothermal operation. So whether or not these things are decreed, if there is an adverse effect from that alteration, that can be considered material injury. So we will be evaluating material injury to prior geothermal operations on new well permitting procedures. Also, we have these new notification requirements from the bill. This one, DWR will email the designated individuals of registered PGOs. We'll go through the registration process within those that are located within 1/4 mile of a proposed non-exempt water well or geothermal well utilizing water from the same aquifer. So think of this if you're familiar with our 600-foot spacing process in the water well permitting world. This is going to be a similar process. And so those registered PGOs will get an email from us and notice of the permit application, and the PGO may choose not to respond to this application. They may provide a waiver verifying that they have no objection to the proposed well to be located within the 1/4 mile, or they have the ability to object to the permit and request a hearing before the state engineer if they're within that same 1/4 mile. And again, just very similar to the 600-foot spacing. If you were to get any of those letters for your wells and say, yeah, that's okay, they can use that well. Also, we are rolling out, and this is already live on the website, we have tributary geothermal notification lists, and these are split out per the different water divisions across the state, the 7 major water divisions. And this notification list will be used by applicants for new geothermal wells with proposed pumping rates of greater than 50 gallons a minute. And they are going to email their application to the tributary geothermal notification list in the water division for which the well is located. And anyone can sign up for these lists, but owners or operators of prior geothermal operations may submit a claim of material injury to DWR within 35 days of receiving this application from the notification list. So this one behaves a little bit more like our substitute water supply list, if you're familiar with that. And this is also in the law now. If the proposed well is in a setting that could potentially injure a historic hot spring, the applicant for the new well must also provide geologic or hydrologic evidence showing that the use of their proposed well will not materially injure such historic hot spring. And then there is a opportunity to further detail this process in the shallow geothermal rulemaking. And again, we'll talk about that in a few minutes. So here it is. Mike alluded to it. This is the full picture, the complicated permitting web we have. And you might find yourself scratching your head right now. I went over to Gemini and said, show me a geothermal hot spring operator confused about permitting. And my goal is to help clear it up so that you're not confused after this. But once you break it down, it's a little bit simpler than it looks on this big map here. So Mike walked you through those deep geothermal operations that do not need a water use permit, but there are going to be some potentially that do need a water use permit from DWR. And so we have a new open system geothermal well permit application. It's going to be deeper than 2,500 feet. We know they need an operations permit from ECMC. However, if their proposed operation will be using tributary groundwater, also known as a distributed geothermal resource, or they have plans to use the water for other purposes other than simply extracting the heat and re-injecting it. They might have cascading uses of the actual water where they're using it commercially or industrially and not just using the heat. Those two scenarios require a DWR water use permit per the geothermal statutes. And then a couple other layers of that is, okay, if it's non-tributary water, but they are using that water for additional purposes other than the heat, they get a non-tributary determination or evaluation by DWR, and that results in a DWR non-tributary water use permit pursuant to 3790-137-4, and that's got to be in line with the statewide non-tributary rules. So that would be a deep operation using water, non-tributary water for additional purposes other than the heat. That is a ECMC operations permit and a DWR water use permit. Or it might be a deep operation using tributary groundwater. And there's a couple different ways to think about tributary groundwater. It can be in an area of the state where it's considered not over appropriated, where there is water available to use without injuring senior water rights. So in that scenario, depending whether or not their permitted pumping rate was greater than or less than 50 gallons a minute, they would eventually get a water use permit and need to comply with DWR's shallow geothermal rules. If it's greater than 50 gallons a minute, they have to notify that new tributary geothermal notification list. And then if they're in a environment where they could impact or injure a historic hot spring, they would need to provide that evidence along with their application, and then allow any PGOs to claim material injury. And then throughout that evaluation process would result in a water use permit and also need to comply with DWR's shallow geothermal rules. Or most of the state is actually considered over appropriated, where there's not enough water to go around. But this is, again, tributary groundwater in an over appropriated basin. You will, depending on your pumping rate, but in both of these scenarios, you will be required to have an augmentation plan through water court in order to replace those depletions associated with your water use. That typically can kick off as an SWSP, but eventually will need an augmentation plan through water court. And once those water court plans are approved or decreed, then we can get into the water use permit to actually start using that water in accordance with its decree. And then again, if you're over 50 gallons a minute, you'll be notifying the list in the water division and provide that evidence that you're not materially injuring historic hot springs. So that is a scenario for a deep geothermal operation needing an operations permit from ECMC and a water use permit from DWR. This one is just permitting of shallow geothermal operations. This is going to be shallower than 2,500 feet, which will result in a DWR operations and water use permit. If it's non-tributary groundwater, they go the non-trib path, get a non-tributary permit, follow the statewide non-trib rules. Or similar to the deep operation, if they're utilizing tributary groundwater and it's not over appropriated, they can get a water use permit from DWR evaluated under 3790 137.2. And if they're greater than 50 gallons a minute, they'll notify the tributary notification list, tributary geothermal notification list, and provide that evidence that they're not going to materially injure historic hot springs. And again, over appropriated basins, they will be required to get an augmentation plan to use that water, even if they're just using it for geothermal uses. Tributary groundwater has to have those augmentation plans in over appropriated basins. So hopefully we've cleared up some of the confusion and you're now sighing a deep breath of relief that you finally understand the permitting process for geothermal in Colorado. But obviously I went through that fast. So if you do have additional questions, please feel free to reach out to me and we'll help try to clear that up for you. So I didn't really touch on ground heat exchangers yet. These are those closed loop systems that are circulating a fluid, even though we do show an open loop system too, but typically these are closed loop systems exchanging heat through that fluid. Because of the new law and the legislation, we have now transferred the licensing and construction regulatory authority of these systems to the board who regulates our water well drillers. And as of today, they are renamed the Board of Examiners of Water Well and Ground Heat Exchanger Contractors. They were previously the Board of Examiners of Water Well Construction and Pump Installation Contractors, I believe. And the bill is actually adding to that board a member with at least 10 years experience in the ground heat exchanger industry. So now the board will be a 6-member board. And of course, they need to incorporate this new regulatory authority into their licensing rules and also the shallow geothermal rules, which will deal with the construction regulations of these systems. All right, I promised we finally got to it, the upcoming rulemaking proceedings. So there's going to be 2 separate sets of rules that need to be amended based on this law. The first is the Board of Examiners Administration and Licensing rules. And that QR code gets you to the rulemaking page where you can get all the relevant information. But in general, we need to incorporate those ground heat exchange contractors, establish licensing requirements and licensing exams for them. We're going to try to lean on the National Groundwater Association, the International Ground Source Heat Pump Association, and other rules and regs out there. If you want to participate in this process, if that means something to you, to sign up for the listserv called BOE info/news on this notification list website. And I'm going to get you into that notification list in a little bit and show you how to sign up for all the different relevant lists that you might be interested in. Also, we will need to amend the shallow geothermal rules, which deal with the permitting fees and procedures for shallow geothermal wells. One big topic we need to think about is exploring that part of the legislation that said wells in a hydrogeologic setting with a potential to impact historic hot springs need to provide evidence that they will not materially injure a historic hot spring. And what will that look like? And in the rules, we can discuss some of these things. Is it a simple distance that they will need to provide that? Are there any other formulas or modeling we can incorporate that gives us some scientific guidance on when you're in a hydrogeologic settings with the potential to impact those historic hot springs? So this is a slightly different rulemaking webpage, but click that link or follow that QR code to get to this rulemaking page. Also, within those shallow geothermal rules, we need to explore the potential for permitting of ground heat exchanger installations. Right now, they operate under an annual permit given to the installer, and they put in as many ground heat exchangers as they wish during the year. We believe maybe it's a better system to permit each project rather than a person. So as we think about those permits, are we going to evaluate them based on maybe potential risk to prior geothermal operations, to other water wells, to contamination of our aquifers? Could that be in some way related to the number or depth of the boreholes that the project will utilize, or that proximity to a historic hot spring? So a lot of things we need to think about in that rulemaking. If they are a lower risk, could they be permitted similar to our notice of intent process for giving us notice, give 3 days notice to monitoring and observation holes? Or maybe higher risk ones could be a little bit evaluated, kind of like our monitoring well process, and maybe we take a look at it, make sure it's not in an area that could cause damage, and put the permit out the door. So a lot to talk about there. We also want to look and seek for better construction and installation reports of these systems. Because we don't know about them, we just know about the people, we don't always get a follow-up report as one of these systems goes in, and we want that data on our website so that other people around can have the data and maybe assess whether or not they can install a system. And then finally, is there an opportunity to incorporate some of the 2025 IGSPA installation standards that were released earlier this year? So if you'd like to participate in this rulemaking proceeding and part of the stakeholder process, QR code and sign up for the shallow geothermal rulemaking listserv to get those notifications. And then today, as of today, we have a brand new webpage on DWR's website. This is the link. It's going to be located under our, I don't know if you can see my cursor, under the public information portion of our website. And we got a whole new geothermal webpage. And this is kind of what it looks like. It's a little bit under review. We need to amend our beginner's guide based on the new law, but this page is going to be your one-stop shop for geothermal information as it relates to DWR, and we're even going to point you back to ECMC if we need to. But on this page is where we can find those two notification tools we talked about. This is the e-form that will be used to register prior geothermal operations. And then this is how you will sign up for all those different notification lists. So I'm going to walk you through, what time is it? About 11. I'll walk you through quick, but there are a lot of links and help documents if you get confused using these. One important thing to remember on registering prior geothermal operations is that the e-form as developed right now can only accept one location and register one location for a well or a spring or a structure. You can't sign in and say, well, I've got 10 springs across the property and here's the 10 locations. Unfortunately, right now you have to do one form per location that you want to get spotted on the map and get those notifications within a quarter mile. So unfortunately, you just have to do it once, but you might have to go through a few times if you have multiple structures to register. So hopefully you're now seeing our eForms dashboard. This is a new system we're rolling out. You need to be logged in or create an account. But that link will take you directly to the registration of a prior geothermal operation form, and we're going to file online. One thing I've learned is you can hide this sidebar for a little more screen. This just describes the purpose of the form as we laid out in the presentation. So you can click next. And here we're just collecting some general information. What is the name of the geothermal operation? Call it Kevin's Hot Springs. Now, what type of operation are you registering? Is it a commercial hot spring? Is it a well? Is it a non-commercial geothermal hot spring on public land? Or as we were discussing, as Mike discussed, we can also register geothermal resource units that are permitted by ECMC. Or you might not be able to figure out which one it is and just select other. So let's go with a hot spring today. The next few questions are going to try to get us on the intake side to associate this new prior geothermal operation with an existing structure in our database, whether that's a surface water right, a well, or at least a water court case. So if you know that there is a WDID, which is an administrative structure, you're going to click yes. Let's pop back up. I'm doing a hot spring, so we don't have a permit. And do you know your water court case? Yes or no, it's okay. I'll just demonstrate yes. So give us that info. And now it's okay, you know your structure's WDID, tell us what it is. This form is not smart in looking it up, but if you need to help find yours, you only know it by name and can't remember the WDID, you have a link out to our structure search. But you can type in your WDID, gotta be 7 digits, structure name. And this information is just to help us kind of get your operation linked up with our database. It's not going to change anything in the records of the structure database. And I also said I knew the case number, so the case number might help us find the structure if we don't have the WDID. So we can do case number 23. And this can take a variety of formats if you have the old decrees. It basically is just a text field. So type in your decrees as best you can. And then this is important. So here you need to add all of those people that you want to receive an email notification for those new permits. So you might need to add a couple of different records. We either need a name or an organization, but we absolutely need an email address because that is the way we're going to contact you. So let me just see if I can do it here. DWR. Fortunately, you got to tab across. I apologize for that. But you should be able to add a second record. And this is so anyone you need to register, keep adding new records, as many as you want. Now, here's the important part. You need to identify your structure by XY coordinates such that we can get it mapped. If it is associated with a WDID, then obviously we can link that up. But if it's something that's not registered through that system, we need to know where it is. So you can search by address, latitude, longitude. You can search by PLSS distances or even quarters or UTM's NAT 83. So let's just do an address. I always do our office. Now, fun thing about this tool is once it's finished loading, if it finishes loading, you can click this pin and drag it to exactly where your hot spring is. This is the joys of live demonstration. There we go. So click your pin and I know it's right here in the parking lot. And that, as it thinks through, will now reflect all of the location information down here based on where you drop that pin. So if you're happy with the location, click next. And now, because you're registering a prior geothermal operation, we will also add you to whichever notification list you would like for that tributary geothermal notification list. So pick whatever ones you're interested in. You can do all of them. You can do none of them. But I guess you at least have to select the one you're in. But feel free to sign up for any of them you'd be interested in. And now here's our catch-all page, additional information. If you know the aquifer your geothermal well is completed in, put it here. If not, we may need to reach out to you. If you're associated with ECMC and you have an API number or whatever number you might have over there, you can enter it here. If you want to upload any files, a photo or anything, feel free to upload. But then we're going to click next. And basically here is where you submit the form, and this is going to ultimately be who's contacted if there's a problem with the form as we intake the information. Just says you've read and agreed to the terms. These terms are not very binding. It just basically says you understand that by submitting this form doesn't mean it meets the regulatory statutory definition for prior geothermal operation. We're not going to verify every single one. We're just going to take it in. You have an opportunity to review your application if you want, but type your name, email address, and submit. And there you go. Once you've submitted, you'll get a notice and it'll show up in your dashboard saying forms requiring your attention. You can see the status that it's in progress. And once it's processed by us and ingested, you'll get hopefully another email saying that it's been processed. So I know we want questions. So let me really quickly show you the tributary geothermal list. So this is a link to our notification. If you're not already signed in, you may need to create an account, but if you're signed up for the produced water lists or the SWSP lists, this is the same system. One trick, this button either shows you all of the lists or those that you're currently subscribed to. So if you want to see the ones that you're not subscribed to, make sure this says all. Scroll down. And here we have all 7 tributary geothermal lists. Just click here. I'm already subscribed, but if you're not subscribed, you click subscribe, and then all of a sudden you are subscribed. We also have that BOE info news and our shallow geothermal rulemaking lists. So please come in, sign up for everything and anything, and you will receive all those notifications. With that, I am wrapped up with my end. Here's our contact information. Just added our new website here for the geothermal landing page, but feel free to reach out if you have any other questions. And I think we're opening it up for the rest of today, so I will stop sharing.
Thank you so much, both Kevin and Mike, for all that information and the walkthrough of the process. I'd like to open it up now for any from the audience. And we have a list of questions that people had submitted in advance, which we can begin addressing. And I will stop the recording.